The air in the birthing suite at the Portland hospital was so sterile you could taste the silence. For Elara Sharma, each tick of the designer clock on the wall was a hammer blow against her heart, counting down the seconds to a life she no longer recognized. Just hours before, she had been timing contractions in their pristine Belgravia townhouse, a home curated to perfection, much like her life, or so she thought. Then the message came. While her husband, the tech millionaire Julian Croft, was supposed to be rushing to her side, her phone lit up not with a call, but with a single brutal text. 2 words that shattered her world more completely than the contractions racking her body. Good luck. She was alone on the precipice of motherhood, with only the ghost of a promise and the chilling echo of his indifference. Elara traced the rim of a water glass, leaving a faint circular smudge on the polished mahogany of the bedside table. Everything in the private suite at the Portland, London's most exclusive maternity hospital was designed for comfort, for luxury. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. With a thread count, she couldn't even guess the lighting was soft and ambient, and a concierge had already offered her a menu of gourmet post-birth meals. It was the kind of place Julian would choose, a place where money could plaster over any inconvenience, any emotional void. It was a beautiful, expensive, and profoundly lonely room. Her own home was much the same. A 4-story townhouse in Belgravia, where the silence was often broken only by the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator or the quiet footsteps of the housekeeper. Julian called it their sanctuary, a testament to his success. He was the golden boy of the London tech scene, the charismatic founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, a company that had revolutionized data security and was now rocketing towards a multi-billion-dollar IPO. He had a smile that could disarm board members and a story that journalists adored, the brilliant self-made man who'd built an empire from scratch. Elara had fallen for that story, for the man who told it with such dazzling conviction. She'd met him at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was a junior curator at the Tate, passionate about art and history, and he was a whirlwind of energy and ambition. He'd pursued her relentlessly, with grand gestures that felt like something out of a film. A private tour of the Louvre, after hours of first edition of her favorite novel, sourced from a dusty bookshop in Prague. He made her feel like the center of his universe, the calm anchor to his fast-paced world. Their life together became a meticulously crafted narrative of success. Dinners with investors, charity balls, weekend trips to their Cotswolds estate. Elara had willingly stepped back from her own career, convincing herself that supporting Julian and building their family was a more important role. She managed their homes, planned their social calendar, and became the perfect, elegant hostess. She was the woman behind the great man, and for a while that was enough. When she found out she was pregnant, Julian had been ecstatic, or so he'd seemed. He'd kissed her, spun her around in their cavernous living room, and declared that their son would be his greatest legacy. He'd overseen the nursery's design himself, insisting on hand-painted murals and a crib carved from sustainable oak. Every detail was perfect, a stage set for the arrival of the Croft heir. The contractions had started that morning, slow and rhythmic. Her due date. She'd called Julian, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. "It's time, my love," she'd whispered. "I'm in the middle of a massive deal, Elara." He'd said, his voice strained, distant. "The kind of deal that sets our son up for life. I can't leave right now. Can you call your sister? I'll be there as soon as I can break away. I promise." Disappointment had pricked at her, sharp and unwelcome, but she'd pushed it down. This was Julian. His work was demanding the pressure immense. This was for them, for their son. So she'd packed her hospital bag. her hands shaking slightly, and told herself he would be there. He had to be. Her sister Anya, a sharp-witted and fiercely protective family lawyer, had arrived within the hour, her face a mask of concern. She'd never fully trusted Julian, seeing a flicker of something cold behind his charming facade. But she loved Elara too much to say, "I told you so." Not yet. Together they'd made their way to the Portland. Anya handled the check-in, while Elara breathed through another wave of pain, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "He'll be here soon." She kept murmuring a mantra against the rising tide of fear. Hours passed. The contractions intensified. Nurses came and went, their professional smiles doing little to soothe the growing ache in her chest. She'd sent Julian a text. "It's getting more intense. The doctor says it could be soon. Please hurry." An hour later, her phone chimed. She lunged for it, her heart leaping with relief. But it wasn't a call. It was the text. "Good luck." 2 words. No love, no "I'm on my way," no "I'm sorry." Just a clinical dismissive sign-off, as if she were a colleague about to give a presentation. She read it again, and then a 3rd time. The letters blurred. The silence in the room suddenly felt suffocating, the luxury an obscene mockery. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, the one she'd poured her heart and soul into, had just been revealed for what it was. A lie. Anya found her staring at the phone, tears streaming silently down her face, her body rigid with a pain that had nothing to do with childbirth. "What is it?" Anya asked, her voice soft. Elara couldn't speak. She just handed the phone to her sister. Anya's eyes scanned the message, and the softness in her face hardened into tempered steel. She took a deep, steadying breath, her lawyerly composure taking over. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Okay, Elara. Forget him. He doesn't exist. Right now, it's just you and your baby. I'm here. We're going to do this together." But even as Anya's strength washed over her, a horrifying image bloomed in Elara's mind. Julian wasn't in a sterile boardroom closing a deal. The critical meeting was a lie. She felt it with a bone-deep certainty that was as real and as painful as the contraction that seized her body at that exact moment. He was somewhere else, with someone else. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't just giving birth to a son. She was giving birth to a new, terrifying reality. While Elara screamed through the final, agonizing stages of labor, Julian Croft raised a crystal glass of champagne. The bubbles fizzed, catching the light from the chandelier in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons at 10 Trinity Square. Across from him, Serafina Dubois laughed a sound like wind chimes and adjusted the diamond tennis bracelet on her slender wrist. A push present she'd purred an hour earlier when he'd fastened it for her. "But darling, I haven't even had to push." "Consider it a pre-push present," Julian had replied, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "A token of appreciation for your patience." The room was a sea of crimson. 1,000 black baccarat roses, their velvety petals the color of dried blood, filled every vase, bucket, and surface. They had been delivered that afternoon, a spectacle of obscene extravagance that Serafina had immediately documented for her 2 million Instagram followers. She was a master of curating her own narrative, and today's story was one of unapologetic, victorious love. Serafina was an influencer, a profession Julian had once sneered at, but now found remarkably useful. She projected an image of effortless glamour and aspirational wealth. Julian wasn't just a feature in her life. He was the ultimate accessory. Her followers lapped it up, seeing their relationship as a modern fairy tale. They didn't see the cold calculation in her eyes or the transactional nature of their embraces. He glanced at his phone, the one he used exclusively for her. He'd powered off his primary phone, the one connected to Elara hours ago. He didn't need the distraction. He had sent the text from a burner app, a final severing blow. Good luck. It was cruel, and the cruelty was the point. It was a declaration of his freedom, a final sneer at the cage he was so close to escaping. He thought of Elara, a fleeting, irritating image. Her soft heart, her trusting eyes, the way she believed in the goodness of people. It had been useful for a time, that innocence. It had provided the stable, respectable home life that investors liked to see. But now, with the IPO looming, she and the baby were a complication, a liability. A tether to a life of domesticity he had no intention of living. He had a new narrative to build, and Serafina, with her public adoration and lack of moral compass, was the perfect co-star. Back at the Portland, Leo Sharma Croft entered the world with a healthy, piercing cry at 3:17 a.m. He was beautiful with a shock of dark hair, like his father's, and Elara's deep, soulful eyes. Elara held him to her chest, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and primal, it eclipsed everything else. For a few perfect, suspended moments there was no Julian, no text message, no betrayal. There was only the weight of her son in her arms, his small, warm body, a miracle against her skin. Anya stood by her own eyes, wet with tears. She cut the cord, a symbolic act of severing not just the physical tie, but the toxic one that had bound her sister to a monster. The bubble of maternal bliss was popped a few hours later. Elara was sleeping exhausted, but peaceful with Leo nestled in the bassinet beside her. Anya, unable to rest, was scrolling through her phone, a knot of fury tightening in her stomach. She knew she had to find proof, something concrete, to shatter any denial Julian might attempt. A quick search of his name brought up nothing, but then she thought of Serafina Dubois. She found her Instagram profile. The latest post was a photo of her smiling coyly, holding a single dark rose. The diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. The caption read, "Some days are just perfect. Feeling so loved." It was the Instagram story that delivered the killing blow. Anya clicked the glowing circle around Serafina's profile picture. The first clip was a time-lapse of the hotel suite being filled with an impossible number of roses. The second was a slow-motion video of champagne being poured. And the third was a short panning shot of the entire suite, a sweeping vista of flowers, champagne buckets, and the London skyline at dusk. For a split second, as the camera panned past a silver ice bucket, a reflection was clearly visible. A man in a dark suit holding a phone. Julian. But Serafina had made a mistake. In her arrogance, she hadn't disabled the location tag. It was stamped in bold, white letters at the top of the screen, Four Seasons Hotel at 10 Trinity Square. Anya's breath hitched. She took a screenshot. Then another. She downloaded the entire story using a third-party app. She had it. Cold, hard, irrefutable proof. The critical business meeting was a lie. The man who should have been holding his wife's hand as their son was born was instead buying diamonds for his mistress in a 5-star hotel across the city. The next morning, Julian Croft walked into the hospital room. He was the picture of a concerned husband, his face etched with fake exhaustion, carrying a ridiculously small bouquet of store-bought lilies that looked pathetic in the opulent room. "I'm so sorry, darling." He began, his voice a practiced, gentle murmur. "The deal was a monster. I couldn't get away. It went on all night. I came as soon as I could." Elara, who was breastfeeding Leo, just stared at him. The man before her was a stranger. The love she'd felt for him had been burned away, leaving behind nothing but the cold ash of contempt. "You're a little late," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, to both of you," he said, stepping forward, trying to kiss her forehead. "Don't touch her." Anya's voice cut through the air, sharp as a shard of glass. She was standing by the window, her phone in her hand. Julian turned his charming mask, faltering for a second. "Anya, I'm glad you were here for her." "Oh, I am too," Anya said, her smile thin and dangerous. "Someone had to be. Your monster deal looked very floral." She walked forward and turned her phone screen towards him. She played the video, the roses, the champagne, the reflection in the ice bucket, the location tag. Julian's face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: confusion, recognition, panic, and then, chillingly, a cold, hard fury. The mask didn't just slip. He ripped it off and threw it away. The concerned husband vanished, replaced by the ruthless CEO, who had just been caught in a catastrophic miscalculation. "You've been busy," he sneered, his voice dropping to a low growl. "It's a specialty of mine," Anya retorted. "Due diligence." "What do you want, Elara?" he asked, not looking at Anya. His eyes fixed on his wife. "Money. Is that it?" "Fine. We'll call the lawyers. You'll be comfortable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to see my son." He took a step toward the bassinet. Elara adjusted her hold on Leo, turning her body slightly to shield him from Julian's view. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but carried the unshakable weight of a final judgment. "His name is Leo Sharma," she said deliberately, omitting the Croft. "And you will not touch him. You will not come near him, and you will not call him your son. You lost that right in a suite at the Four Seasons." She looked up, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. The woman he had dismissed with good luck was gone. In her place was a mother, and he had just discovered far too late what a terrible enemy he had made. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the soft coos of a newborn. But for Elara, the world had sharpened into a painful high-definition clarity. The betrayal had acted like a cauterizing flame, burning away the fog of her naivety. Every memory of her life with Julian was now tainted, recontextualized. The lavish gifts weren't signs of affection. They were transactions. His charming apologies after arguments weren't sincere. They were manipulations. The gilded cage she had called a home was just that, a cage. Her love for him, once the central pillar of her existence, had not just died. It had inverted, transforming into something cold, hard, and purposeful. It was the icy resolve of a queen whose kingdom has been sacked. Her kingdom now was a small, fragile boy named Leo, and she would raise empires to protect him. Anya was her war council. While Elara focused on Leo feeding him, holding him, and memorizing every inch of his tiny face, Anya was on the offensive. She moved Elara and the baby out of the Portland and into her own spacious Kensington apartment, a place filled with books, legal pads, and the comforting aroma of strong coffee. She created a fortress around her sister, screening calls and fielding the initial pathetic attempts at contact from Julian. "He's offering a settlement," Anya said one afternoon. Her phone pressed to her ear as she paced her living room. "A very generous one," his lawyer calls it. She listened for a moment, then laughed a short, sharp bark. "Define generous, Richard." "No, she will not be signing a non-disclosure agreement." "Yes, I heard you. You can tell your client that his offer is an insult. We'll be in touch." She hung up and looked at Alara, who was rocking Leo gently. "He thinks he can buy his way out of this. He thinks a check will make it all go away." "It's not about the money," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about accountability. He can't just do this and walk away onto the cover of the next business magazine while I'm erased." "Good," Anya said, a predatory glint in her eye. "Because I've found someone. He's not just a lawyer, he's a goddamn dragon. His name is Marcus Thorne." Marcus Thorne was a legend in London's divorce courts, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a reputation for surgically dismantling the reputations of powerful men. He didn't handle separations. He orchestrated strategic demolitions. Their first meeting took place in his oak-paneled office, a room that smelled of old books and victory. He listened to Alara's story without interruption, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. He watched the Instagram video Anya had saved. He read the good luck text. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at her, his gaze penetrating. "Mr. Croft's primary weakness is his public image, particularly now with the Nexus Innovations IPO on the horizon. He has cultivated an image of a brilliant, stable, family-oriented visionary. The truth, as you've laid it out, is that he is a callous philanderer who abandoned his wife during childbirth. That narrative is toxic. It could spook investors." "I don't want to destroy his company," Alara said, a flicker of her old self showing through. "There are hundreds of employees. Your husband's actions threaten his company." "Mrs. Croft." "Not you," Marcus corrected her gently. "Our goal is not destruction. It is to ensure you and your son receive what you are rightfully owed, and to do that, we must be prepared to use the leverage we have. And right now, our greatest leverage is the truth. As Marcus predicted, Julian's strategy was to attack. He couldn't deny the affair, the evidence was too public, so he tried to control the narrative. Through his high-powered PR firm, whispers began to circulate through the city's gossip columns. Alara was emotionally unstable. She was prone to hysterics. The marriage had been troubled for years. They were subtle, poisonous little barbs designed to paint her as a vindictive gold digger, and him as the long-suffering husband who had finally understandably strayed. Julian, grossly underestimating the woman he had married, thought this would intimidate her into accepting his initial offer. He believed she was weak, the gentle curator he had so easily molded into a trophy wife. He had forgotten the steel in her spine, the sharp intellect she had suppressed for his benefit. He had no idea that he wasn't just fighting Alara. He was fighting the combined fury of a scorned wife, a protective sister, and the most formidable divorce lawyer in the United Kingdom. The real breakthrough, however, didn't come from a legal document or a financial statement. It came from a memory dredged up from the depths of Alara's subconscious in the quiet, sleepless hours of the night. She was sitting in the dark, Leo asleep on her chest, the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing a comforting weight. Her mind drifted back to the early days of their relationship. Julian flushed with wine and success after securing a major round of funding, talking about the genesis of Nexus Innovations. He always told the same polished story in public, a flash of inspiration, a loan from his father and endless nights coding in his garage. But that night years ago he'd said something different. He was half drunk, his guard down, his words slurring slightly. Everyone thinks it was Dad's money that got it started. He'd scoffed. That was just for show. The real seed, the angel, that was Isabel. Pity she couldn't keep up. Elara had asked who Isabel was. Julian had sobered instantly, his face closing off. No one. An old friend. It's not important. He'd never mentioned the name again. Now, in the silence of Anya's apartment, the name echoed in her mind. Isabel. He hadn't just mentioned her name. Later that same night, he'd been mumbling in his sleep a restless, troubled sound. Elara had leaned over to soothe him, and she'd heard him say it again, clear as day. A single whispered word laced with something that sounded like guilt. Isabel. It wasn't just a name. It was a secret. And Elara suddenly knew, with an instinct. She was learning to trust that this secret was the key. Julian hadn't just built his empire from scratch. He had built it on something or someone he had buried long ago. Finding Isabel was no longer just part of her divorce strategy. It was a quest to uncover the original lie, the foundation upon which all his other betrayals were built. Finding Isabel was like searching for a ghost. The name was common, and Julian had covered his tracks well. There was no mention of an Isabel in any Nexus Innovations founding documents or press archives. It was a dead end. Anya, however, was a lawyer, and her research skills were forensic. He said she was an angel, an early investor, but that he met her before his father's official loan. Anya reasoned, typing furiously on her laptop. This would have been around 10 years ago. He was at Imperial College London, then studying computer science. Let's assume he didn't meet his angel investor in a pub. He met her where his ideas were gestating. Anya spent 2 days cross-referencing academic papers, university registries, and old tech forums from that era. She looked for collaborations, co-authored projects, anything that linked the name Julian Croft to an Isabel. Finally, she found it. A faint digital breadcrumb trail on an archived university server. A final-year project proposal for a decentralized encrypted data-sharing protocol. The lead author was listed as Isabel Varma. The secondary author was Julian Croft. "Got you, you son of a bitch," Anya whispered. Isabel Varma was no longer in the tech world. It took another day of digging to find her. She was now Dr. Isabel Varma, a tenured lecturer in theoretical mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. Her online presence was minimal, a simple staff profile with a grainy photo and a list of dense academic publications. She had, it seemed, retreated from the world of innovation and into the quiet, predictable cloisters of academia. Elara knew she had to be the one to go. This was too personal for a lawyer to handle. Leaving Leo in Anya's devoted care for the first time was agonizing, but it was necessary. She took the morning train to Edinburgh, the Scottish landscape rushing past the window in a blur of green and grey. She found Isabel in her office, a small, cluttered room overflowing with books on number theory and quantum physics. The woman who looked up was in her late 30s, with weary, intelligent eyes and silver threads already starting to appear in her dark, pulled-back hair. She wore no makeup, and her clothes were simple, functional. There was a profound stillness about her, the quiet of someone who has weathered a terrible storm and found a way to survive in the calm that follows. Elara introduced herself carefully. Dr. Varma, my name is Elara Sharma. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I'm here because I believe you used to know a man named Julian Croft." The change in Isabel was instantaneous. The academic calm shattered, replaced by a flicker of old, deep pain. Her posture stiffened. "That was a very long time ago," she said, her voice brittle. "I know this is difficult," Elara said, her own voice gentle. "But it's important. I was married to him. We have a son. He left me on the day our child was born." Isabel stared at her, and a flicker of pained recognition of empathy softened her guarded expression. She gestured to the worn visitor's chair. Elara sat. And then Isabel's story poured out, not in a rush, but in a slow, tired torrent, as if a dam she had spent a decade building had finally broken. She and Julian had met at university. She was the prodigy, the brilliant coder who had conceptualized a revolutionary encryption algorithm. It was her brainchild, the theoretical foundation for what would become Nexus innovations. Julian was the charismatic one, the handsome, ambitious student who saw the commercial potential in her genius. He was dazzling, Isabel said, looking at a spot on the wall a decade into the past. "He saw me, I was always the quiet, nerdy girl in the lab. He made me feel seen. He made me feel brilliant. We fell in love. We were going to build this thing together. Our company. Our future." He convinced her to make him a co-founder, arguing that he had the business acumen to sell her vision to the world. They became partners in every sense of the word. He proposed to her with a simple silver ring on the banks of the Thames. For 2 years they were inseparable, working tirelessly, fueled by caffeine and shared dreams. Her algorithm, his salesmanship. They secured their first round of seed funding based on a demo she built. That's when things started to change. Julian began to sideline her in meetings, taking credit for her technical breakthroughs. He'd say things like, "Isabel is the genius behind the curtain, but she'll bore you with the math. Let me tell you what it means for the market." Then she got pregnant. I was overjoyed, Isabel said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. I thought it would bring us closer. But for Julian, it was an inconvenience, a complication in his 5-year plan. He became distant cold. He told her that a pregnant fiancée and a baby would make them look unstable to the next round of major investors. He started insisting that she sign over her majority shares to him temporarily, just until the company was on more stable footing. He claimed it was to protect their family. I was young. I was in love. And I was pregnant, she whispered. I trusted him. I signed the papers. He gave me a small payout, a fraction of what my shares were worth, and called it a goodwill gesture. 2 weeks later, he left her. The stress and heartbreak were immense. She suffered a late-term miscarriage. She lost the company, she lost the man she loved, and she lost their child. All at once. I was broken, Isabel continued, her voice hollow. He threatened me with an army of lawyers I couldn't possibly afford. He had the documents I had signed. He told me if I ever spoke a word of this, he would ruin me, paint me as a bitter, jilted ex, trying to extort him, and I believed him. So I took the pittance he gave me, finished my PhD, and I disappeared. I buried myself in theoretical work, in things that were pure and true, that couldn't be stolen. Elara sat in stunned silence, her heart aching for this woman she had never met. The cruelty of it, The calculated sociopathic precision of the destruction was breathtaking. Her own story was not a unique tragedy. It was a sequel. Julian wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator who repeated his crimes. He found brilliant, loving women, saw them as resources, and when they became inconvenient, particularly with the complication of a child, he discarded them, taking everything and leaving them with nothing. Serafina wasn't the love of his life. She was just the next tool to be used and eventually thrown away. The fight was no longer just for her and Leo. It was for Isabel. It was for the ghost of a child who never got to be born. He didn't just steal your company. Isabel, Elara said, her voice ringing with a newfound conviction. He stole your story, and I'm going to help you get it back. Isabel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She saw not a victim, but an ally, a fellow survivor. And for the first time in 10 years, a flicker of fire returned to Isabel Varma's eyes. The quiet academic was gone, and in her place was the brilliant woman whose genius had been stolen and who was finally ready to reclaim it. The revelation of Isabel's story shifted the battlefield entirely. This was no longer a messy divorce. It was a corporate origin story built on theft and deception. Marcus Thorne's eyes lit up with a cold, strategic fire when Elara and Anya relayed the account. "This is the kill shot," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The IPO is everything to him. The entire valuation of Nexus Innovations, its entire public narrative, is built on the myth of Julian Croft as the sole, brilliant founder. If it comes out that the core intellectual property was stolen from his pregnant ex-fiancée, whom he subsequently abandoned, the underwriters will run for the hills. The board will be forced to act. This is a catastrophic material risk." Their strategy pivoted. The divorce proceedings were now secondary to the corporate leverage they held. Marcus's team began quietly gathering evidence to corroborate Isabel's story, hunting down old university emails, financial records of her initial payout, and affidavits from 2 former university colleagues who remembered her groundbreaking work and Julian's sudden opportunistic involvement. News of their investigation inevitably trickled back to Julian. His response was swift and brutal. The subtle media whispers became a full-blown smear campaign. Tabloid articles appeared quoting anonymous sources who claimed Elara was a paranoid, unstable woman who was concocting wild conspiracies to extort a larger settlement. They painted her as an unfit mother, a clear and terrifying prelude to a custody battle. One evening, Julian appeared at Anya's apartment building, bypassing the doorman and confronting Elara as she was returning from a walk with Leo. His charm was gone, replaced by a raw, menacing fury. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Elara," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You and your little lawyer sister think you found something. It's the word of a bitter, forgotten ex against mine. Drop this. Take the settlement I offered, which I am now halving, by the way, or I swear to you I will take Leo from you. I will spend every last penny to prove to a court that you are a delusional, vindictive woman, and you will never see your son again." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. For a moment, icy fear gripped Elara's heart. He was powerful, he was ruthless, and he was capable of anything. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, her whole world. But then she thought of Isabel alone and broken for a decade. She thought of the cold dismissal of the good luck text. The fear solidified back into resolve. "You can't threaten me with my son, Julian." she said, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. Because he is the very reason I will never, ever stop. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The incident, however, had an unintended consequence. It spooked the one person Julian believed he had under his complete control, Serafina Dubois. Serafina was ambitious and morally flexible, but she was not stupid. She had witnessed Julian's switch from charming benefactor to cold-blooded tyrant. She saw the articles, heard the venom in his voice when he spoke of Elara, and realized that his cruelty was not specific to his ex-wife. It was a core component of his character. She was his partner in crime now. But what happened when he no longer had a use for her? What happened when she became the next inconvenience? She knew about the IPO, the immense pressure he was under, and she began to fear she would become collateral damage. Driven by self-preservation, she made a calculated move. She acquired a burner phone and sent a single anonymous text to the one person she knew would be logical and unsentimental enough to listen Anya Sharma. I have information about Julian's finances, information that will be very useful to your sister. I want full immunity from any legal proceedings and a one-time payment. If you agree, I will tell you where to find the real money. Anya, after consulting with Marcus and a skeptical Elara, agreed to a clandestine meeting. They met in a quiet corner of a public library, a place of hushed tones and anonymity. Serafina, stripped of her Instagram glamour, looked smaller, more nervous. She laid out the ultimate betrayal, the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It was a twist so cruel and premeditated, it left even the unflappable Anya momentarily speechless. Julian's affair with her wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. It was a meticulously planned business strategy. He's been planning to leave her for over a year, Serafina explained, her voice a low whisper. Their prenuptial agreement has a standard fidelity clause. If Elara could prove infidelity, she would be entitled to a significant portion, 20% of his net worth at the time of the divorce filing. Julian considered that an unacceptable business expense. So Julian had hatched a scheme. For the past 12 months, while still playing the part of the devoted husband, he had been systematically and secretly moving the vast majority of his personal wealth. Guided by a team of ruthless offshore accountants, he funneled hundreds of millions of pounds into a complex web of shell corporations in Panama and a series of anonymous, untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. The money isn't just hidden, Serafina said. It's gone. On paper, his personal net worth is a fraction of what it truly is. His most valuable assets are his Nexus shares, which are tied up in the company, but his liquid fortune, he's made it vanish. The timing of the affair was the final brutal stroke. He chose to make his infidelity public and undeniable on the very day their child was born. He did it to maximize Elara's emotional distress, to ensure she was at her most vulnerable and least capable of fighting back. He flaunted the affair with Serafina, creating irrefutable proof, but only after he had finished moving the money. The good luck text wasn't just a callous farewell. It was a triumphant taunt. He was telling her, good luck finding the fortune I've already stolen from you. He wanted to get caught. Anya realized the horror dawning on her. He orchestrated the whole thing. The rose is the bracelet, my finding your Instagram. He knew it would happen. He was creating a public spectacle to trigger the fidelity clause, but only after he'd already emptied the bank. It was a preemptive strike, of breathtaking cynicism. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had defrauded her, using their marriage, their unborn child, and his mistress as pawns in a cold financial calculation. Serafina slid a USB stick across the table. "That's everything I have. Account numbers, transaction records, the names of the shell companies." He was careless. He kept a private ledger, and I made a copy. "Now you owe me." Anya took the drive. It felt heavy, dense with the weight of Julian Croft's true character. They had been trying to expose a liar and a cheat. They now had proof that he was a master criminal, a man who would defraud his own family with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business dealings. And they had him cold. The air in the Croft Enterprises boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive leather and simmering panic. Sunlight, typically a welcome guest, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching dust motes dancing in the tense atmosphere. It was a Tuesday morning, a day that was supposed to be about damage control. The emergency board meeting had been convened by Julian Croft himself, a desperate last-ditch effort to quell the rising tide of whispers and accusations that had begun to erode the foundations of his empire. He stood at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, his posture radiating a confidence he no longer felt. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, but a faint sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed the terror churning within him. He was in the middle of a grand, sweeping gesture, dismissing the allegations as nothing more than a coordinated attack by jealous rivals, when the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. The interruption was so abrupt, so contrary to the established protocol of this corporate sanctuary, that for a moment every person in the room was frozen in stunned silence. And then she walked in. Elara Sharma. She was not the woman they remembered, the quiet, elegantly dressed wife who was a beautiful but silent fixture at company galas. This Elara was different. She wore a simple navy blue dress that was professional and severe. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was clear of all but the most minimal makeup, and her eyes, dark and resolute, held a fire that seemed to scorch the very air around her. In her arms, she carried not a designer handbag, but a sleek black laptop and a small, determinedly clutched portfolio. At her side walked Arthur Vance, his expression grim and resolute, his presence lending an immediate and undeniable gravity to the situation. "What is the meaning of this, Julian?" Julian sputtered, his voice a mixture of outrage and genuine shock. The carefully constructed facade of control he had presented to the board began to crack. "This is a private meeting. You have no right to be here, Elara." Elara didn't look at him. Her gaze swept across the faces of the board members, men and women, she had hosted in her home, individuals who had praised Julian's genius while benefiting from his ruthlessness. "I believe I have every right," she said, her voice calm and steady, yet it resonated with an authority that commanded attention. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "I am here as a major shareholder in this company, a fact that my husband seems to have conveniently forgotten, and I am here to provide the context that Mr. Croft's presentation is so desperately lacking." Before Julian could object further, Arthur placed the laptop on the table and opened it. The screensaver was a softly focused photo of a sleeping baby, Leo. Elara allowed herself a brief, loving glance at the image, a silent reminder of what and who she was fighting for. It was the fuel for her fire. For the past several weeks, she began her eyes meeting each board member's. In turn, you have been told a story of corporate espionage, of betrayal, from outside forces. Julian has painted himself as the victim. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air, before delivering her next line with surgical precision. The truth is, the greatest threat to this company is not outside these walls. He is standing at the head of this table. A murmur went through the room. Julian's face, already pale, turned ashen. This is ridiculous. She's a scorned wife lashing out. This is a personal matter, a domestic dispute that has no place here. A domestic dispute. Elara's voice took on a sharp, icy edge. She finally turned her gaze to him, and Julian visibly flinched at the cold fury he saw there. Was it a domestic dispute when you systematically embezzled company funds to finance a lifestyle for your mistress Serafina? Was it a domestic dispute when you used a shell corporation registered under her name to acquire company assets at a fraction of their value? She gestured to the screen. Arthur, with a click of the mouse, brought up a complex web of financial transactions. Bank statements, wire transfers, and shell company registrations. Each one was meticulously documented, sourced, and dated. The numbers were undeniable, a damning digital trail that led directly from the Croft Enterprises accounts to Julian's secret life. The evidence is all here. Elara continued her voice, a measured, damning cadence. The property deeds for the penthouse apartment you purchased for her, the receipts for couture gowns, diamond jewelry, and first-class flights to private islands, all paid for with money that belongs to this company and its shareholders. Your money. She looked pointedly at the board members, who were now leaning forward, their faces a mixture of fascination and horror. Julian was no longer shouting. He was shrinking, deflating before their very eyes. Lies. Forgeries, he whispered, but the words lacked any conviction. Are they? Elara's tone was pitiless. Then perhaps you can explain this. This was the final nail. Arthur pressed another key, and an audio file began to play. The sound of Julian's voice, unmistakable and arrogant, filled the silent room. It was a recording from one of his calls with Serafina, captured by the spyware Elara's team had installed. Don't worry about the board. Julian's voice sneered from the speakers. They're a bunch of old fools. They see the profit margins and they sign where I tell them to sign. As for Elara, she's an afterthought. She'll get her good luck text and fade away. By the time the baby is born, you and I will be in Monaco, and this whole life will be a distant memory. If the financial documents had been a death by 1,000 cuts, the audio file was a guillotine. The raw, undisguised contempt in his voice, the casual dismissal of his wife, his unborn child, and every single person in that room was absolute. The silence that followed the recording was heavier and more profound than any sound. It was the sound of an Emma collapsing. It was the sound of a man's character being laid bare for all to see. Mr. Henderson, the oldest member of the board, and a man who had been Julian's father's closest friend, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked not at Julian, but at Elara. And for the first time, he saw her not as Julian's wife, but as a leader in her own right. He saw the strength, the intelligence, and the profound integrity she possessed. He cleared his throat. A vote is required, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment and finality. All those in favor of the immediate removal of Julian Croft as CEO of Croft Enterprises on the grounds of gross misconduct and misappropriation of company funds. Every hand in the room went up. There was no hesitation. The vote was swift, brutal, and unanimous. Julian Croft stood there, a statue of a man, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He looked at the faces that had once admired him, now regarding him with cold disdain. He looked at Arthur Vance, who stared back with a stoic lack of pity. And finally, he looked at Alara. The woman he had dismissed with 2 words, the woman he had deemed an afterthought, had just single-handedly dismantled his entire world. Alara did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply gave a single sharp nod to the board. Her work was done. With quiet dignity, she closed the laptop, picked up her portfolio, and turned to leave. As she walked past Julian, he reached out a desperate, grasping motion. "Alara! Please," he croaked the single word, a universe of pathetic pleading. She stopped for a fraction of a second, but did not turn to look at him. "Good luck, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She had taken his cruel dismissal and turned it into his epitaph. Then she walked out of the boardroom and didn't look back, leaving behind the ruins of a fallen king and stepping into the bright, uncertain but liberating sunlight of her own reclaimed future. The empire had fallen not with a bang, but with the quiet, resolute click of a laptop being closed and the steady, determined footsteps of a queen who had finally taken her throne. A single text message. Good luck was meant to be an ending, a cold, final dismissal of a wife and an unborn child. But it became a beginning. It was the spark that ignited a fire of resilience in Alara Sharma, transforming her from a pawn in a rich man's game into the queen who overturned the entire board. This story is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't the absence of pain, but the courage to fight back when you are at your most broken. It's a reminder that integrity is the one currency that cannot be faked, and that the fiercest power in the world is often the protective love of a mother. What did you think of Alara's journey? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone found incredible strength in the face of betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give us all strength. If this video moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories of truth and triumph.